Alexei Navalny faces court in Moscow again. The Kremlin critic loses his latest appeal, and his political organizations could soon be declared extremist. So, what's next for Russia's opposition movement and those who'd pinned their hopes on Navalny? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Russian opposition leader, dissident, Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is known by many titles in the West. Some see him as one of the few people who can unite opponents against President Vladimir Putin. But nowadays, he's limited to speaking his mind in court or in jail. On Thursday, he lost an appeal against his latest conviction. And Russia's financial watchdog has added his campaign offices to a list of so-called extremist organizations ahead of a court decision to outlaw them. His allies are disbanding, but say they're determined to fight on. Bernard Smith reports from Moscow.
On a poor quality video link from a prison hospital, Alexei Navalny looked thinner. He's lost 20 kilos since his return from Germany in January. Telling his wife Yulia and the rest of the court he's eating a few spoonfuls of porridge after ending a 3-week hunger strike. This hearing was an appeal against Navalny's conviction for defamation. But Vladimir Putin's most prominent critic had other things to talk about too.
20 years of incompetent government have led to the following result. There is a crown slipping from his ears. There are lies on TV. We have spent trillions of dollars and our country continues to slide into poverty.
Navalny's opportunities to have his voice heard are rapidly shrinking. Simultaneously, in another Moscow court, prosecutors opened a case to declare Navalny's anti-corruption group, the FBK, and his regional offices as extremist, making them equivalent to Al-Qaeda.
Navalny's regional campaign offices do not exist anymore, but there are dozens of cool and mighty regional politicians. There are thousands of their allies. There are powerful independent political organizations that will be doing investigations and monitoring elections, public campaigns and rallies.
The case was adjourned, but the court has already imposed an interim order stopping Navalny's group from operating.
A rather powerful opponent is standing against us. It is the whole state machine of a nuclear superpower state. It can behave brutally, as we could see ourselves during the events which are also related to the current case. We are defending the truth. We believe that our client FBK is a fair organization which does not violate any law.
You rarely hear Navalny's name mentioned on Russian television. Any attempt to remind people who he is quickly erased. This mural in St. Petersburg was painted over hours after appearing overnight. Alexei Navalny's supporters say they'll carry on with their anti-Kremlin activities. But without Navalny's charismatic personality, they might find it much harder to have an impact. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
All right, let's bring in our guests in Moscow. Alexander Soloviev, board member of Open Russia, an opposition group. In Vancouver Island, Michael Bociurkiw, global affairs analyst and former spokesman for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE. And back in Moscow, Maria Lipman, senior associate at the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University. A warm welcome to you all. Maria, let me start with you today. This move to ban all Navalny's political organizations, to declare them extremist, I mean, Navalny's supporters see this as an inevitability at this point, right? I mean, that's why offices are in the process of being disbanded, correct?
Yes, this is correct. And I think the government is out to destroy Navalny's organizations, formal and informal. And actually, it is on a broad campaign to destroy anything and anyone who dares express open and vocal disloyalty to the regime. It is not limited to Navalny himself and his organizations. It goes much broader to some media outlets, to lawyers, to non-government organizations. And it seems that the campaign will continue, and the government is very serious about it. It is determined to put an end to open disloyalty.
Alexander, picking up on the point that Maria was making there, let me ask you, how dangerous will this extremist label make things for Navalny's supporters, for staff members at his organization? And does this extremist designation mean that staff and supporters are going to be potentially facing prison time?
Well, despite the fact that we've already had a totally clearly political article on undesirable organization for more than 6 years, this is a totally new level of pressure. Because if your organization or you personally or just a number of people, which is also allowed to call a number of people extremist organization without even having legal entity, if you are being called this extremist label, or if you've been given this label, that means that anything that concerns you, even in the past, yes, that's still possible in Russia. Even in the past, when it was legal, may be used as the tool to say that you are also extremist. Even if you've been given legally, you've been donating money to them. Even if you shared their post, even if you liked their post, this is unprecedented level of pressure. But I think that still doesn't mean that. Their net is going to be destroyed for 100%. I think even if they continue making the videos on anti-corruption videos, which sometimes get something like more than 100 million views, it's already going to be great.
Michael, there are a lot of analysts in the past who had suggested that President Putin would not publicly go after Alexei Navalny in too harsh of a way, suggesting perhaps that Putin was worried of how much of a threat Navalny could be. But it seems now that President Putin is really no longer tolerating Navalny, right?
Absolutely. He's now, through these actions with our fellow guests I've described, he's really expressed his kind of what a big threat Navalny is. And I should say that, one thing we've looked at, we've seen from COVID-19 is that a lot of strongmen and authoritarian regimes have used the pandemic to, let me put it this way, to level the playing field in their favor. So that's exactly what's happening right now. I would describe the actions as chilling, as scary, that there's no limit to it. They've gone after political opponents, but they haven't finished. They're also going after media. You'll see liberal media outlets closed down. You'll also see artists already under scrutiny and will be intimidated. And then the thing that worries me too is list of countries, including Canada, where I am right now, will be labeled as unfriendly countries. And what that means on a practical ground is that Russian staff of various Western embassies will be not allowed to be working there. One more quick thing, if I can, is another big difference between now and, say, the Cold War, which was a very chilling atmosphere, is that the regime or the Putin administration has technology on their side. So it's much more easier for them, in a sense, to go after their critics, looking at their digital footprints, that sort of thing, to persecute them. It's a very, very scary atmosphere right now, I would say.
Maria, if I could zoom back a bit with you for a moment and talk about, tactics in the past versus tactics now. I mean, in the past, what we would typically see in Russia, prosecutors going after opposition figures like Alexei Navalny or others in a more indirect way, say utilizing laws that weren't necessarily related to their political activities, or banning them from holding gatherings, saying that they didn't have the correct permits. I mean, that's just one example. But now, I mean, attempting to declare Navalny's organization as extremist, how much of a break is this from the tactics of the past?
I see this as a radical break. And if we look at Alexei Navalny personally, for quite a while, for many years actually, the government obviously preferred to have him at large than in jail. The government, of course, always kept him under pressure. He was under house arrest, under administrative arrest. He was in jail for a while, but never for too long. He was harassed. He was persecuted, prosecuted, constantly under pressure. However, in general, he remained at large. Apparently, the government thought during that whole period that Navalny would be more dangerous if he is jailed, that would produce public outrage and people in the streets, and the government sought to avoid that. The breaking point, the turning point was this past summer when Navalny was poisoned, whether this was an attempt to assassinate him or to scare him. away from his activities is impossible to say. However, that was certainly a turning point, followed by, of course, his rehabilitation in Germany, his return despite many warnings from the Russian government that he would be arrested, and he was indeed arrested. And now he's in jail, and actually the government has full capacity to keep him in jail as long as it pleases.
Alexander, we mentioned earlier in the show that Russia's financial monitoring agency has now added Navalny's network of regional campaign offices to a list of organizations involved in what they call terrorism and extremism. Does that essentially make it impossible for Alexei Navalny's organization and his supporters to raise money going forward?
Well, for those legal entities enlisted in that list, so of course that makes it impossible to donate the money. Moreover, it puts under a big threat those who donate money, even ordinary citizen who donated like a couple of bucks absolutely legally may be put into jail up to 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. So the ordinary donation may end up in 6 years in prison. If you are or the protest, this process of accepting donations for this organization, you may end up for 8 to 10 years in prison. So the terms are pretty much serious, and that puts under threat everyone who has been donating money in the past. But I think they've already closed all the bank accounts, and they've already made everything on their account. The Navalny stuff. Everything on their account, which was necessary to make it more or less safe for their supporters. So I don't think the government will prosecute everyone who's been donating at least some amount of money, but I think that might be used against the political activists who are, for instance, trying to run for elections.
Michael, how formidable was this nationwide political infrastructure that Navalny and his supporters had built up across the country? And is it, from your point of view, is it effectively destroyed now?
Yeah, well, the strength that they had, and I think the strength that they had over the regime was technological, the social media prowess. The views, for example, that were garnered by that video of Putin's dacha was incredible. And I think that's the regime probably felt that it was playing catch up with Navalny's movement, that they couldn't match that type of technological prowess. And, we see this happening around the world, including in China, where these regimes are putting pressure on social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, and others to crack down on their opponents. So in the case of Navalny in Russia, VKontakte is a big platform there. And we won't see the same kind of game being played out as we've seen in China, where they go after Western social media companies. They'll go after their own companies, and they have a lot of leverage there. So it's a very big setback for them. If they don't, of course, they don't have the ability to communicate with the common man through mass media, so they use social media. And if they're cut off from that, that's a huge, huge setback for Navalny and his movement.
Maria, from your perspective, do members of the international community who support Alexei Navalny really know who he is? I ask this because a lot of the way that he is represented, especially in the media in the West and in other countries, it highlights the fact that he's a dissident, that he's an activist, a lawyer, an opposition leader, but a lot of the time it leaves out his history of ties to nationalist groups, right?
Well, he indeed joined some nationalist groups in the past. I think he did that mostly out of solidarity with them because they were also persecuted and harassed by the authorities. And he also, as a politician, he saw a potential there. There was a time, which is actually over now, when nationalist sentiments ran very high, and nationalist groups also had their rallies in Moscow and elsewhere, but especially in Moscow. So as a politician, he saw a potential for support. So if this is a constituency, a sizable constituency, then he cannot ignore it. But all those sympathies, I think, of Alexei Navalny and those contacts have long been in the past. And I think in general, people in the West have a reasonably fair view of Navalny. Navalny is a fearless, indomitable, unbending fighter, like nobody else in Russia, totally capable to raise his awareness, which was quite a feat in Russia. He was totally ignored by large audience media, and yet he was able to create an awareness of way over half of Russians. He also demonstrated that he's unafraid and continued his crusade against corruption for years on end. He also has this amazing talent of explaining very complicated corruption schemes in an easy and funny way, which is also to his credit. So I think his contacts and sympathies for nationalism is a tiny element in his long road to public awareness in Russia.
Alexander, what do you think? I mean, are there supporters of Alexei Navalny in Russia that are troubled by his history of ties to nationalism?
I should be honest with you that even me, for instance, I should be. A lot of people think that I should be offended by his past because I come from a mixed family, but I'm not, because he has never expressed the ideas of shaming people like me or something like that. Because Maria described it quite well, because that was a long time ago, and that he never actually had any kind of nationalist movement. And you should also bear in mind that the nationalist movement of 20 years ago in Russia, that was not actually necessarily the nationalists in the nowadays understanding, because that was a bit different movement, which sometimes included people who were like almost Nazis, but from the other hand, the majority of them were absolutely normal people who were just not happy with the situation with the immigrants, and who were not against the immigrants, but who were just threatened by the fact that the situation is not. It looked like the situation was not controlled by the authorities, and we had chaos in that sphere. But I do not think this is good. I mean, this part of his past. But I also don't think that this must be something that puts the cross on his future in politics.
Michael, Alexei Navalny is no doubt a darling in many countries in the West. The media really presents him in a very heroic way. World leaders talk about him very admiringly. In some sense, we've seen this kind of thing happen with other opposition figures. We've seen this kind of thing play out with Juan Guaido in Venezuela, with Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar. Is this the same, in some ways, a similar narrative playing out here with what we're seeing with Alexei Navalny?
Yeah, absolutely. And also the Belarus opposition leader. And by the way, I think that's one reason why Navalny came back. He knew the threat that was he was being faced with, that he was afraid he would end up in the political wilderness and perhaps being even branded by Russian people or the regime as a foreign agent. But yeah, the sad thing right now, you mentioned, for example, Aung San Suu Kyi, the diplomatic toolbox is very empty right now for the West. There aren't beyond sanctions, what else can they do? So I think, if I were a Western policymaker, I would be confused at the moment on what the next move is. And, when it comes to Navalny, or when it comes to the brutal regime in Myanmar and other places, I think rhetoric, statements of concern don't work anymore. You have to go for the hardcore stuff. And what I mean by that in Russia's case is removing them from the international financial system. It's the nuclear option, but I think it's the only way where it's the only option where Russia, the Kremlin, is very terrified of happening to them. So one more thing, if I may, I think, I hate to say it, we're still in early days with the Biden regime, but I think in a way we're seeing a Obama 2.0, where a lot of tough rhetoric, don't do this, don't do that when it comes to Russia. Look what just happened on the Ukrainian border. But there's a red line that they will not cross. And I think Putin has sensed that. He's tested the new Biden administration, and they think they can get away with quite a bit now.
Maria, the fact that Navalny is still making headlines, even from behind bars, the fact that there are videos of him now from his last court appearance in which he is criticizing Vladimir Putin, is this damaging in Russia to Putin right now?
Well, the damage is limited, and I should say that Navalny's support in Russia, we have to admit that, is also limited. His support is usually estimated by pollsters at about 20%. We should not underestimate the way the broad public in Russia is responsive to the Kremlin line, and that the West is there to do harm to Russia in every possible way. And the West is using opponents to the regime as their instruments, that those who oppose the regime are either sponsored or funded or inspired or otherwise abetted by the West. It's not that everyone believes that, but there is a constituency that does, and there is a constituency that remains indifferent to Navalny and his allies, his supporters. And there are also those who believe that troublemakers such as Navalny, of course, Navalny is unique, but there are other troublemakers in Russia, that they are bound to make things worse, not better. There is a very strong clinging to status quo in Russia. And the government, of course, is taking advantage of that.
Alexander, what's next for the opposition movement in Russia right now? I mean, is there a viable opposition leader, a viable opposition to Putin at the moment?
Well, there are a lot of opposition leaders within Russia, but unfortunately, they're not famous abroad. But at the same time, I should admit the fact that this new era of political pressure probably means that we will have less and less legal opportunities to stay in Russia and to name ourselves opposition, because it looks like sooner or later, or very soon, we will not be able to say that in an open way that we are opposition. Because that will immediately lead to a term in prison, because the words are already being used as the tool to put people into prison. And moreover, right now, the photos from the cameras around the city are being used to say that, you see, you've been in the center of the city at April 21 when there was a illegal rally supporting Alexei Navalny. That means that you should be fined, but as long as you have 3 fines, you go to prison again. So this is being used right now, even against me, though I don't pose any threat to the regime, I believe. I think that we are just on the eve of a new era, a quite harsh and quite tough era. I don't have a clear and easy answer to your question, what's going to happen next. I think that, first of all, a lot of political leaders, opposition leaders, will have to, will have to abandon Russia.
Michael, we don't have a whole lot of time left, so I'm going to ask you to please keep your answer brief. We just have about a minute. But essentially, at the end of the day here, President Putin remains firmly in control. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, he doesn't only have the state apparatus at his disposal, but the one thing I'm really worried about, too, are so-called freelance elements in the security service or military that might act within Russia to go after his opponents, or feel like they have license to go after their opponents overseas as well. That is a very worrisome and chilling element here. And I think it's one that the West has to be cognizant of and keep surveillance over those elements allied to Putin that may go after Putin opponents, not only in Russia, but overseas as well.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Alexander Soloviev, Michael Bociurkiw, and Maria Lipman. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see this and all of our previous programs again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.
vaccinated flight.
The world's first fully vaccinated flight is a clear demonstration of all the measures that Qatar Airways has put in place to ensure the highest standards of safety and hygiene on board. PPE for staff, a zero-touch in-flight entertainment system, UV cabin cleaning systems, disinfectant robots. Today is an important day for the airline industry, and the message for travelers is that we are working tirelessly to implement every measure to safeguard their health. Thank you.
It's the political debate show that's challenging the way you think. I want to know where you two stand on cancel culture.
It is decreasing the range of ideas that can be heard.
From international politics to the global pandemic and everything in between. If tech companies are the ones with all the power, what do? What's the solution?
We get organized.
What are world leaders and governments missing?
We are talking about targets in like 2040 or 2050 when we need targets for now.
Up front with me, Mark Lamont Hill, on Al Jazeera.
Did you know you can watch Al Jazeera English streaming live on our YouTube channel? Plus thousands of our programs, award-winning documentaries, and in-depth news reports. Subscribe to YouTube/Al Jazeera English.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello there, I'm Nick Clark. This is a News Hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. High school students are among the dead as a truck bomb explodes in eastern Afghanistan. The first burials are held in Israel after a stampede at a religious festival kills at least 45 people.
Even when we are ready to purchase it, the vaccines are not available.
There is no vaccine with us.
Several Indian states say they've run out of COVID-19 vaccines, even as the government plans to start vaccinating everyone over 18 from Saturday. The pandemic boosts Amazon's bottom line. We ask what that means for the economy as the world recovers from the pandemic.
Namsan Hamushna have all the sport. Leading sports in the United Kingdom had begun a 4-day social media boycott in an effort to fight back against online discrimination.